To those of you who got divorced, what was your final straw? The realization, the catalyst, for your divorce that others just couldn't seem to understand. He changed. After 8 years of marriage, he changed into a selfish guy with narcissistic tendencies. Only his wants, needs and opinions mattered. For the next 5 years I waited for the guy the first married to return. I told him either he joined me in therapy or I would leave. He didn't believe me. I hoped he would see the life that we created together was worth working for. It took another 3 years, but I left him. When I realized that if I stayed with my ex, my daughter would learn that was what a healthy relationship looked like. And I'd never forgive myself. It was lots of little things. But it all came down to his attitude. He made all the decisions about money because he made it. So it was his. The very final straw was when I was having a medical problem. The doctor wanted to run a test that insurance wouldn't cover. Husband forbade me to take it because it would cost money. The cost for the test was $200. That was it for me. I just thought, WTF am I doing? Staying with a man who doesn't even think I am worth $200. I took the test and I filed for divorce. When I was in the hospital and he looked bored and put out that he had to be there rather than worrying about my allergic reaction. Also when he didn't see anything wrong with being on the phone all the time with his classmate, who was clearly just a friend even though there was this, and he was yelling at me like a spoiled teenager about "you can't control me." I'm allowed to have friends when I asked calm, normal questions. We were young 20s. Didn't really know who we were yet. Then our daughter died and we couldn't grieve together. That's a process you have to traverse individually, and you're someone completely different on the other end. It's been 13 years and we are friends again. But we are vastly different than we once were. My sister told me it's not a question of when he will stop or change. It's a question of how many times are you willing to go through this cycle. I knew immediately in my gut that I had been done for over a year. Still took one more cycle of his bullshit for me to call it. I think I needed to witness it all one more time as some kind of validation. I really didn't need to, though. I was so done. My realization was incremental. There was not a big event but a whole series of things where when I tried to communicate like an adult I was dismissed and shut down. I divorced my abusive alcoholic husband because he was mean. Best thing I ever did. Life is just too short to be miserable with an asshole. I was working 3 jobs and he was working 1. I made 2/3 of our income. He had a perfectly working 3-year-old Honda. He traded it in and bought himself a Mercedes with a huge monthly payment over my objections. There was a lot of other stuff going on. But that was the last straw. When he discussed with me his future plans to deflower our daughter so she can learn sex from her father because that's what animals do. That was the last straw. Ain't no way I am allowing him to fuck our daughter. When I realized I couldn't raise children with him. He had been on the fence, and after hanging with a couple who was expecting, he said he finally felt sure he wanted kids. And I realized I didn't want them with him. Told him a day or 2 later I wanted a divorce. Years of alcoholism that he failed to address. Eventually he nearly pissed on a sleeping child. He was so drunk. Gave him the come to Jesus talk. He blew it off. Surprised Pikachu face when I walked. I'm not divorced because we never married, but after 15 years of fighting I finally realized it wasn't going to get better. I was diagnosed with celiac and that asshole expected me to make 2 meals for dinner because my GF Food tasted like crap and I couldn't eat what the 3 boys were eating. That was the straw, and I couldn't divorce him until my mother died, and I could pay legal fees from my inheritance 2 years later. Married 21 years. Never again. He threatened to kill me and my kids. I called the cops. They wanted me to leave that night, but I knew he'd behave that night. We were out 6 weeks later with furniture, cash and supplies plus support. My ex just stopped trying. He would go out of his way to avoid me, my family, our children. Last straw was he left for a hunting trip when I had the flu and our kids were very young. I met a guy who treated me like a human being, who is intrinsically empathetic, who is genuine and kind, who does his share. It made me realize that I was a tool to my husband, and I was exhausted and burnt out and tired of fighting to be heard and not have to manage every single aspect of our adult lives when I had a supposed partner to share the load. Another alcohol and maybe drug rant yelling session for hours, full of insults. That last time he pushed the personal attacks over the edge. I told him we were getting divorced on the spot. It was over. There was not a single shred of love left. The slow escalation of the alcoholism and mental abuse over the decade had finally dropped over the cliff. I waited way too long. If I had groups like this when I was young, I would have never married him. I had been gone for 4-5 weeks internationally. He made me wait hours at the airport and then said we talked every day on the phone. I have nothing to say to you when I was trying to tell him about my work trip. He immediately shut himself in his office when he got home and didn't want to spend any time with me. Berated me for being tired after not sleeping well from a night shift. I packed my shit and never looked back. He bought me a video game for Xmas that I didn't want with my money because he didn't work and hadn't worked the last 10 years. When our couples therapist took me aside after a session and told me, look, he's not open to changing at all. You're going to either have to live with him as is or leave. I packed up all my shit while he was at work and moved in with my parents. Best decision I ever made because 10 years later and he's worse than ever. Jobless, friendless and hairless lol. I left my husband because he was so lazy it was painful to watch. Also he wanted kids and I wanted a PhD. I was suffering from postpartum depression which kicked my CPTSD into dangerous suicidal ideation. I realized I was going to kill myself. I asked him to take me to be admitted to the psychiatric hospital. He asked if we could do it on Monday because the weekend was busy filled with family obligations. When he had a full-blown mantram meltdown because I started wearing makeup again for my new job. When I finally got it through my thick skull that MFR just hated me. For what exactly? IDK. But he did. He didn't love me. He didn't even freaking like me. I didn't want to spend the next 50 years with someone who didn't even like me. Not worth it. My best friend, now fiancé, kissed me when I was talking about how unhappy I was in my life. Afterwards I tried to keep the marriage going but I was so unhappy. My ex was sexually and financially abusive and I just wanted out. I would have left him either way I think, but my fiancé kissing me made me realize I could be happy again. That I wasn't stuck in the marriage that was slowly killing me. I started to see who he really was and that he was not going to change. I was also tired of the one who took care of everything and mothering him.